So the next bill will be House File 5, Representative Jordan. So welcome to the committee, Representative Jordan. We're very glad you're here. And I will have Rep. Joachim make the motion that House File 5 be re-referred to the General Register. Is that your motion, Representative?
Yes, Madam Chair, that's my motion.
Wonderful. Thank you. So welcome, Representative Jordan, and please proceed with your bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. When 1 in 6 Minnesota children is trying to learn on an empty stomach, it is far past time for us to act. And that's why I'm honored to present House File 5, a bill to bring breakfast and lunch to all Minnesota students. We know hunger is something that too many students bring with them, and our system is letting kids go hungry. Not only do 1 in 6 Minnesota students experience hunger in schools, but 1 in 4 students experiencing food insecurity come from families who do not qualify for existing nutrition programs in our schools. So here's what House File 5 does. This bill establishes no-cost breakfast and lunch for all students attending schools participating in the National School Lunch Program. It also enrolls qualifying schools into the Federal Community Eligibility Program, or CEP. You might also hear some advocates refer to it as SEPs. CEP is a federal program that provides universal, no-cost meals at schools in high-poverty neighborhoods where many students come from families eligible for SNAP and other assistance programs. This bill also appropriates money to MDE to get going on the setup and administration for this year. The fiscal note for House File 5 is based on the average number of students served in 2018 and 2019. District data related to school meals has been more inconsistent due to the pandemic. And MDE projects that the total cost for providing school lunch and breakfast in 2024 will be $189.7 million. The fiscal note assumes a 4% annual growth in the number of students served, which would increase costs in fiscal year 25, 26, and 27. MDE also projects it will incur about $200,000 each year, starting in fiscal year 2024 for 1.5 FTEs, which will be nutrition program consultants, plus another $90,000 in IT costs for fiscal year 24. The appropriations in this bill reflect the fiscal note, but also include $400,000 to MDE in fiscal year 23, so it can get schools prepared for the start of the school year. The total amount appropriated in fiscal year 23 and 25 matches the projected costs for 24 and 25. And so members, now is the time for House File 5. Schools are no longer receiving resources that they need for meals from the federal government like they did during the pandemic. Student lunch debt is racking up across the state, and families struggling with the high cost of food need these meals now. I also have staff from House Fiscal and MDE Assistant Commissioner Darren Cordy. And with that, Madam Chair, I stand for questions.
Thank you, Representative Jordan, and thank you for walking over a little bit of the fiscal note. We appreciate that, too. So discussion to House File 5. Representative Kresha.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative Jordan, for bringing the bill forward. Did you mention the total cost, just to make sure we're on agreement on the numbers? So what is the total cost for 24 and 25?
Representative Jordan, and we do have the fiscal note in our packet that is updated to reflect the current bill. Representative Jordan.
Yep, it will be $387 million from the general fund in fiscal year 24 and 25, and $419 million in fiscal year 26 and 27.
Representative Kresha.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And Representative Jordan, I don't see him in the packet yet. Do we have district runs available?
Representative Jordan.
Madam Chair, Representative Kresha, those have not been produced yet.
Representative Kresha.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative Jordan. So just short comments on this. We heard this in Ed Finance. No district runs yet, which means we don't really know the impact to our local schools. A couple of things in consideration of this. What you're trying to accomplish with making sure that we have universal access to meals is agreed. Students should have access to meals, and they should have that at an affordable rate. The problem is we're creating a government program here to do that, and the issues that I've identified and brought up in education finance and for ways and means that we should look at is because we're creating a government program, a state government. If you look on page 2, lines 2.19 through 227, what we're trying to do here, as I understand it, is we're trying to make sure we maximize the CEP provisions, and we're forcing schools to fill out paperwork so that they can get access to that. And appreciate that we're trying to buy that down. But one of the things that we're trying to do is reduce the free and reduced forms. It seems like we're putting more burdens on the schools to do this. That may be fine, and the schools may want to do that, but we should just acknowledge that because we're creating a government program, we are creating more work on the backs of the schools, and we're actually making this, in my opinion, a bit more complicated. Because, as testified here, we have student debt, we've heard shaming, we've heard reduce the point of sales. The reality is none of that will be addressed in this bill because this does not address a la carte lines. This gives one student the access to one breakfast and one lunch. If a student decides to go back, they will still have to pay for that. So schools are still going to be burdened with collections. The reality is some people don't pay their bills, and we acknowledge that, and there is a debt that schools end up with a collection. I think a better proposed solution would be to put the 441 or the 387 or the 419 right on the formula and then let schools buy down the debt. I think when we see the school runs, what we're going to see is we've created a state program that puts a whole bunch of money into the school universal programs, and that money cannot go out. Once it goes into the school lunch fund or once it goes into the nutrition fund, it cannot come the other way out. So in other words, a school district like a couple of schools that I talked to over the last couple of weeks, they're only carrying like $15,000 or $20,000 in unpaid debt. And they're going to see a large amount of money higher than that they cannot move out for teacher programs, teacher pay. We're going to see an unequal distribution of state aid on this. And I think that's the danger of this. What you're trying to accomplish, Representative Jordan, I fully acknowledge that we should take the schools out of collection. And I think, as I've offered in education finance, and I'd be happy to come back with it, why don't we just allow schools to submit their debt, we pay that down, and then put the rest on the formula so that, like I said, we could increase teachers' pay. We could stop the schools from and teachers from having to feel like they have to buy their own classroom supplies. So I would not support this as it is. I think it's a program where we're trying to solve a mosquito problem with a very big state program that I think, and I hope this isn't the case, and I hope it's successful, but I think that as we run this through, we're going to see scenarios where there will be a misappropriation of funds. There will be funds that the allocations will be higher in schools that they shouldn't be, and that's problematic for me. So at this point, members and Representative Jordan, I would not recommend voting for this bill.
Representative Becker-Finn.
Thank you, Chair Olson. And I also want to acknowledge how long Representative Jordan's been working on this issue since she first came to the legislature. It really was brought to our attention during the pandemic for a lot of folks who maybe weren't paying attention, but Representative Jordan's really been our champion on this even before that time. And just wanted to respond to a couple things. As far as creating a government program, kids already eat at school. If you have school-age kids, they eat at school right now. And the other thing we know is that during the pandemic, when it was paid for across the board, the sky didn't fall. Kids got food, and actually the kids who, when my kids were learning from home, our school used those funds to put together, you could go get a box of food, and those lines were always, people needed the food. And it was put to good use. And I think as far as concerns about forcing schools to do paperwork, what do you think the forms are that everyone's supposed to fill out every single year? It's paperwork, and I know it's especially burdensome for folks who don't speak English as a first language, for folks who are really struggling, working multiple jobs, like asking them to fill out an extra government federal form is a lot of work. And ultimately, I just don't understand why this there's any disagreement about this issue. When folks in other countries need our help, when there are disasters like hurricanes, what's the first thing we do? We give people shelter and we feed them. And at a base level, if our government can't make sure that our children are fed, I mean, this should absolutely be a priority, and I'm just really happy that we're bringing it forward. We're making a priority for, early on in session, because ultimately we should be able to agree on making sure our kids have food. And then the other thing I just wanted to touch on too, I know there's been some discussion in the other committees about like, oh, but what if like a wealthy person, their kid gets like $1.75 breakfast? Well, in other areas, we're fine with giving breaks to wealthy families. I don't know why when it comes to like a $3 lunch, we would be concerned about that. So I just think this is a really good bill and happy to be a co-author and really glad that we're moving forward. So thank you, Representative Jordan.
And we have quite a few members on the list, which is great, but we have Nash, Joachim, Petersburg, and Scott, and hopefully after that, we'll be able to move on with the bill too. So Representative Nash.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I would make the comment to my colleague on the other side of the aisle. No one's saying that this is a bad idea, and when we ask questions, it doesn't mean that we think it's a bad idea. We're asking questions about the mechanics of some of this stuff. And I remember when I was a freshman, my friend and our former colleague, Representative Sarah Anderson, was leading the charge on some of these very same things. So please don't misconstrue questions about the mechanics of this bill with us opposing it necessarily. So my question to the author, Madam Chair, is Representative Jordan, you articulated some IT costs, and yet I don't see them spelled out in the bill. Can you help me understand what those are and how that is to be paid for either from the state or by the independent school districts?
Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Representative Nash. I am looking for the page on the fiscal note, but I do know that MDE is requesting $90,000 for IT costs and is also requesting an additional $400,000 for administrative costs to really kick the tires on some of those IT concerns and get the program set up with schools to get going. And that money can be used for this year for the setup, but also transfer into 2024 for that. And if you give me a second, I will find the. Oh, yep, it is on page 3. And the second paragraph indicates some of the tech costs and data collection that would go into that. So that would be the paragraph that explains the IT costs.
Representative Jordan, and I will note there are appropriations in the bill that match the fiscal note as well. So Representative Nash.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. And to the author, are those costs all state? Is some of that going to be pushed down to independent school districts that they'll have to levy for, or is that taken care of?
Representative Jordan.
Madam Chair, Representative Nash, there are some of the local fiscal impacts that are considered within the fiscal note are costs that schools would have to incur to modify their point of service tracking systems. So that is money that would go in, and if Assistant Commissioner Cordy would like to correct me, that money is appropriated directly for MDE and Minute to do their end of the IT work.
Looks like we have someone from the Department of Education coming up to answer the question. So welcome to the committee. Please identify yourself for the record and proceed with your answer to the question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Darren Cordy. I'm an Assistant Commissioner at the Minnesota Department of Education. Representative Nash, the funding that's appropriated for IT costs in this bill does go to MDE. It would not go to districts, but the per meal funding reimbursement structure is intended to fund the total cost of the program, not just the cost of the actual food being served. So schools could certainly use some of the extra reimbursement that is generated through state funds here to cover the costs of those IT or point of service upgrades that they may need to do as a result of this bill.
Representative Nash.
Last question, Madam Chair. And that all sounds interesting, but I also know that with the cost of inflation, food is going to be going up, and that there may not be any money left over for them to handle this back office IT work. IT costs money, and pushing it down to the district level is going to be a little clunky, I think. And I will just say this before I finish. During the pandemic, I watched the school districts that are in my district. They stepped up. It was great. They fed anybody who showed up, and I was proud to watch it happen. So once again, please don't construe how we vote with anything other than that we have questions and are not exactly convinced on how this bill rolls out. I have questions. We'll bring it to the floor since I'm sure Madam Chair would like to continue moving along. I could feel her eyes even without looking over, but I just think that there's some problems here. I am concerned that we're pushing some of these costs down to the district level without any way to pay for them. As we all know, those are called unfunded mandates. Thank you.
Representative Joachim.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And once again, I want to just thank Representative Jordan for all the work she's done on this. I rarely see a legislator that knows her bill backwards and forwards like you do, and I really appreciate it, especially the fiscal note. There's a lot of good details on fiscal notes if folks read them, and I wanted to just maybe clarify too, one of the reasons why we're doing this is we've done it before. We did this during COVID. Districts have the capability of doing this. Districts have asked for it to be simpler, getting rid of the forms and streamlining. And I think the administrative costs that they've been going through, collecting all these forms and doing this detailed work will more than be made up for with the money we're putting into feeding all kids. One of the reasons why it's harder to detangle, maybe detangle how some folks have suggested that we should just increase the income level or do this or do that. It's not just the CEP program that districts that have 62.5% of kiddos that qualify for free and reduced lunch receive. Our federal school lunch program is also subsidized for portions of meals for all children. So you can't really kind of pick and choose that way and have districts be able to actually implement it. It's just much easier and cleaner to do it this way. And I am glad we're asking detailed questions, and a lot of those detailed questions were discussed in the committees as it moved along where it should be. And I understand folks have been talking to their school districts who have come out and said this is the way they like to do it as well. And just remember, your vote is your voice.
Thank you. Representative Petersburg.
Excuse me. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think we need to remember that a bill that we think is good, if it's based upon incorrect assumptions, probably isn't the best bill that we could do. And I think there are some misconceptions and certainly misperceptions out there. For example, we just heard the assumption that all children eat school meals at school. Well, that's just not true. I know that I have kids that do not particularly like meals sometimes, and so they will pack their own lunch or they will do something different. And I think that's an issue for us to remember, that this isn't a universal across the board. But if I could ask the author just one quick question, Madam Chair. The question is it a fair statement to say that if a school district is expected to pay to create food and lunches and breakfasts for the entire student body, that they will provide the proper amount of food that would feed all of them? Is that a fair statement?
Representative Jordan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And that's not just to be clear, that's not an assumption that this bill is based off of. This bill does not assume that every student will consume one breakfast and one lunch from their school district. In fact, the reimbursement, it's a reimbursement. So schools will only be reimbursed for the meals that are actually served. And so this bill would provide one breakfast and one lunch that meet the federal and state nutrition guidelines to each student that requests one. If a student comes in with their own lunch and they're not served a lunch, they would not be, this district would not be charged for that lunch. And there would not be a reimbursement for meals that were not served, if that makes sense. And so that is the assumption that the costs are based off of. And the costs and time do take into consideration some increase in uptake in the free program, but it is not based on the assumption that every child is receiving one breakfast and one lunch. And to the question about what would the meals be and how much would they be would be meals that would fit the federal and state guidelines for school meals. I don't have it in front of me, but there's a long list of regulations that schools must adhere to if they participate in the federal school meals program. It includes things like how much calcium is in a meal? Is there milk provided? What are the amounts of added sugar, are just some of them. And so that does deal with portion size, but if a student would, for example, want 2 lunches, that student and their family would be on the hook for the second meal. But this would provide the one breakfast and one lunch.
Representative Petersburg.
Thank you. I think you just actually made my point. Because the fact that the reimbursement and so forth occurs after the meals are prepared and after the kids have gone through line, schools just absolutely don't know who's going to not need the meal and who isn't. So they're going to have a tendency to create the meals that are necessary for the children, which is going to lead to waste. When you say, well, if they don't eat the meal, then they don't get reimbursed. Well, that's well and good, but I don't think any school district is going to ask at 8 o'clock in the morning, hey, how many students here are going to eat and how many aren't? That seems a little bit silly. So my only concern is that we have created a much bigger headache than the current system rather than dealing with a much straightforward way. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative Petersburg. Representative Noor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative Jordan, for bringing this bill forward. We're talking about our kids. I've got 4 kids in the school district. Every kid is different. And quite frankly, this is something we need to be talking about and supporting all kids no matter where they come from. And this is not a mosquito problem, Madam Chair. This is about our kids. I want people to know this is not a mosquito problem. With that, I would like to ask for a roll call, Madam Chair.
A roll call having been requested, there will be a roll call on House File 5. And we still have more discussion, so we'll finish up here. Representative Scott.
Madam Chair, I think Representative Carisha said it
Okay.
for our team as our lead on education. Thank you.
Okay, and we will give Representative Jordan the last word. And I will say, just as someone who's chaired Ways and Means, I don't think there has been a member who has been in my office more than Representative Jordan, who knows her bill and has a really solid fiscal note and has been working very hard on making this right. And it's based in, you have a great fiscal note, and I hope all members read it and honor the work that you have done for the last many, many years to get this bill here. And so it is based in good information and good data and working with the department. And with that, Representative Jordan, last word before we go to a vote.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members, for the discussion. Happy to answer questions. But this bill is fundamentally a bill that puts students and their needs first. We know that the way students interact with school has lasting impacts for the rest of their lives. And food is one of those most elemental issues that I've heard from students and adults that really matter. We heard from the American Diabetes Association about how this is important for students' physical health. We heard from Children's about how this is important for students' mental health. And we've heard from students themselves in committee about how addressing mental health, addressing the achievement gap, addressing disparities between white students and students of color can be addressed with this bill. So I do ask for member support. This is a bill that is important for healthy and happy families across our state. Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, a roll call has been requested. Clerk will take the roll.
Chair Olson,
I pause on the roll call. I wanted to make sure we renew the motion that House File 5 be re-referred to the General Register, and that was Representative Youakim's motion, and that is the motion we are voting for. Clerk will take the roll.
Chair Olson, aye. Vice Chair Edelson.
Aye.
Vice Chair Edelson, aye. Lead Garofalo excused. Representative Acom.
Aye.
Acom, aye. Representative Agbaje.
Aye.
Agbaje, aye. Representative Becker-Finn.
Aye.
Becker-Finn, aye. Representative Freiberg.
Aye.
Freiberg, aye. Representative Gomez excused. Representative Hassan.
Aye.
Hassan, aye. Representative Heinzman. No. Heinzman, nay. Representative Hornstein.
Aye.
Hornstein, aye. Representative Howard.
Aye.
Howard, aye. Representative Cleavorn.
Cleavorn, aye.
Cleavorn, aye. Representative Creshaw.
Krisha, no.
Creshaw, no. Representative Liebling.
Aye.
Liebling, aye. Representative Lilly.
Aye.
Lilly, aye. Representative Moeller.
Aye.
Moeller, aye. Representative Nash.
No.
Nash, no. Representative Noor.
Aye.
Noor, aye. Representative Novotny.
Money, no.
Novotny, no. Representative O'Neill, excused. Representative Pulowski.
Pulowski, aye.
Pulowski, aye. Representative Petersburg.
No.
Petersburg, no. Representative Barr.
Bar, no.
Barr, no. Representative Pinto.
Aye.
Pinto, aye. Representative Schumacher.
No.
Schumacher, no. Representative Scott. No. Scott, no. Representative Youakim.
Aye.
Youakim, aye. Madam Chair, there are 17 ayes, 8 nays, and 3 excused.
There being 17 ayes, 8 nays, and 3 excused, the motion prevails, and House File 5 has been re-referred to the General Register.